Yo my people, welcome back to another episode of Project 30, a 30-day module where I teach you guys completely free of charge how to trade. Now if you guys haven't watched the other episodes, make sure you go back and watch them, because if you haven't watched them, you're not going to understand what I'm saying to you guys in this episode. And if you guys haven't seen my face before, my name is OneFX. I'm a content creator and I'm a day trader as well. I've been trading for over a year now, and alhamdulillah, that's all I can say. Nevertheless, you guys should know the drill by now. Get your pen and paper out, get ready to take notes. If you're not taking notes, get off this video. You're not taking trading seriously. So make sure you're taking notes and you're going over them after every single video. Now in today's video, we're going to be going over something called breaker blocks. If you guys haven't heard this one before, it's calm. I'm going to help you guys out. Now breaker blocks can also be used as an entry model. An entry model is just a specific way that you can enter the market. You can enter a trade. This is also called the unicorn model. I did not name it the unicorn. The guy that named it, shout out to him. I don't come up with these names. I don't make the rules. I just play by them. Yeah. So without further ado, let's get right into the episode. Now what is a breaker block? Like I said, a breaker block is an entry model. This can help you refine your entries and get precise entries. Now breaker blocks is also a type of PD array. Now what are PD arrays? Points of interest where we can expect reversals. Now like I've said to you guys before, time is fractal. So all of these concepts, they'll work on every single time frame. Whether it be the higher time frame or the lower time frame, it doesn't matter. Now the best thing about breaker blocks is it can help you avoid missing your entry. That's the main pro that I find about it. Another thing about them as well is it can get you a better entry. It can get you a tighter stop loss. And of course, tighter stop loss means that we're going to make more money because it's risk reward. I'll teach you guys about that later on. But in general, a tighter stop loss means more precision. However, of course, you can get stopped out very easily. Nevertheless, that's enough yapping. Let's get straight into it. So you guys put that as your title, make your notes, and let's get on with this video. So for example, let's just say we had a nice form of accumulation, just classic textbook buy model. What we then had was a form of manipulation, sweeping all of this liquidity, tapping into a higher time from PD array possibly as well. We had a leg up. However, we ended up sweeping liquidity one more time, then given the market structure shift. So an easy way to see it is we would have a high, we'd also have a low, we would have a lower low, and we would have a higher high. So as you guys can see, we have a low, a high, lower low, higher high. This is the most easiest way that you guys can possibly remember it. It sounds very goofy, but hear me out. Think of the number 1 and then 2. How does that make sense? We have a high and a low. What do we next need to have? A higher high and a lower low. You see how it's doubled? That's the most easiest way I can remember it. Think of 1 and 2. High, low, higher high, lower low. Right? We have a high, low, higher high, lower low. That's the most easiest way I can remember it. I hope that works for you guys. If not, figure out your own way to remember it. But that personally worked for me. Now, how do you actually mark out the breaker? The breaker is the first high and low. This here would be your breaker block. You mark it out from the swing low to the swing high. You wouldn't do something like this, not just from the low, not just from the high. You would mark out the full low to the high. Easy way to identify it as well. Look for the liquidity sweep and then mark out your market structure shift. You guys can see these two lines, if we were to extend them out, this will be in line with your breaker block. Right? The market structure shift and the liquidity sweep. Now using your breaker is going to help you a lot. Why? Because you can take your entry directly off of the breaker block and have your stop loss on the low. So you guys can put your stop loss on the low of the breaker instead of putting your stop loss on the swing low. What this does is it gives you a more precise entry. Does that make sense? Instead of you having an unnecessarily big stop loss, you can refine that stop loss. There's more precision in it. Another thing as well, with a breaker block, it helps you get a better entry. Why? Instead of you taking a fair value gap up here, you can take it directly off of the breaker. It's just common sense, right? If we were to take a fair value gap, the first fair value gap, let's just say, if we were to take the first fair value gap, we're going to encounter a lot more drawdown. We're going to have a bigger stop loss and we're going to go through more time in drawdown. Does that make sense? And automatically, when you're in a trade and you're going through drawdown, your brain does not want to be there. You want to be out. This can lead to you doing very stupid things. Like, for example, if you were to encounter, I can't even speak. If you were to encounter so much drawdown, you would be thinking, do I close the trade? What do I do? It's going up and down. What do I do? Does that make sense? Whereas with a breaker block, you're getting a better entry. You're buying in a discounted price and you've refined your entry a lot more. Another thing I need to tell you guys, you want to ideally align a breaker block with a fair value gap. So for example, if this breaker block was perfectly in line with a fair value gap, that is bang on. Like 10-10. This makes the unicorn model kind of like a higher quality setup if there's a fair value gap perfectly in line with the breaker block. Sometimes there'll be a fair value gap a bit like midway through the breaker, or sometimes I'll take it off the fair value gap, sometimes I'll take it off the breaker block. However, the main thing with the breaker block is it helps you keep a refined stop loss. Like I said, instead of you having a big stop loss and ruining your risk to reward, I'll go into risk to reward later on, but essentially if you were to put in £1, you would make £2. That's like your risk to your reward. So instead of you having a 1 to 2 risk to reward, you can get a better risk to reward by refining that stop loss and getting a 1 to 3.8. So if you were to put in £1, you'd walk away with £3.88p. Now the same would go for a sell model. Let's just say we had a clean form of accumulation. We swept all of this liquidity. We tapped into a higher time from PD array, whatever it may be. We get this low, a high, a higher high being established here, and then we get a lower low. It's kind of like we take out both sides. How do we mark it out? From the low to the high. Think of it like this. This is the small leg and this is the big leg. We want to mark out the small leg. Once again, you guys can take your entry directly off of the breaker block, put your stop loss on top of the breaker instead of putting it all the way on the high, and target the resting pool of liquidity. I'm hoping that all makes sense there. If it don't make sense, try to rewatch it, I don't know. But nevertheless, let's go directly onto some chart examples. Now the first thing I can see is, let's just say, like, I'm freestyling this, by the way. We have all of this liquidity built up here, these relatively equal highs. Sellers were looking at this as a level of resistance. Every time it tapped into this level, sellers were entering the market and they were selling essentially. And bear in mind, when they're selling, it's not just you and your auntie placing down a trade in the market. There are thousands and millions of trillions, okay, trillions of drag, but there are hundreds of thousands of people taking these sells. So what does this do? This creates so much liquidity because their stop losses are all on the line. You guys can see they will all be entering sells and they will be putting their stop losses on this swing high above this level of resistance. So what does the market do? It takes them out of the trade. Another thing, we can link this back to higher time frame bias. The whole entire time we were inside of this 4-hour fair value gap. Did we disrespect it? No, we were respecting it. And we can even zoom down and see this here. We have this order block, the last bullish candle before the big move down. Were we respecting it or disrespecting it? We were clearly respecting it. The bodies were failing to close above. They were failing to close outside of the box. So this is indicating to me that we're already bearish. Now, why is that going to help? This will help me not look at this as a breaker structure. So in that case, I'm not going to be taking a buy off of this fair value gap or something. Does that make sense? You're going to be looking for sells because I told you guys in the higher time frame bias video, if you haven't watched that, go check it out. Never, ever, ever trade against your bias. So in this case, because we were bearish, we would be looking for liquidity sweeps of highs and market structure shifts of lows. As you guys can see, we get this liquidity sweep and then we get a clean market structure shift. What can I see? Let's just zoom in. We're looking for breaker blocks. So what can I see? Let's just mark out the market structure shift. So I know that automatically this will be the low of the breaker block. This will be where my entry should be. Your entry should be on the market structure shift essentially. I can also see that we had this last liquidity sweep before the market structure shift. So this is clear as day. We have a high, a low, higher high, lower low. Remember, small leg, big leg. What do? We mark out the small leg, and literally all we do from here is from the swing high to the swing low. This is our breaker block. This box here is where our entry is, and our stop loss is on top of the breaker block. What can we do now? We can target the opposing side of liquidity. Where can I see liquidity is resting? We have these two relatively equal lows. Yes, it did slightly get pinched. However, it is very relatively equal, and there's going to be a lot of people that have their stop losses there. So in that case, I would simply take this trade and I will target this swing low here. This would be a nice 1-to-3 risk to reward ratio. Now, why this breaker block thing is so good is because instead of me forcing out a fair value gap all the way up here to try to get the tighter stop loss and whatever it may be, I'm not missing out on the trade. And instead of me having my stop loss all the way on the swing high, I'm not getting such a bad entry. Does that make sense? I'm not getting a bad risk reward. My stop loss is refined. My trade management is on point. Does that make sense? And you guys can see what happens. Price slowly comes back in. Any second now, we get tagged in. I wouldn't be trading this because it's too early in the day. And as you guys can see, eventually the TP gets hit. Now, like I said, instead of you guys forcing out a fair value gap all the way up here and having like the tighter stop loss, using a breaker block will simply help you avoid missing out on the trade. Does that make sense? Now, this is a 15-minute breaker block. We can find breaker blocks on any single time frame. It does not matter. Now, I'm going to show you guys another example of breaker blocks. As you guys can see, there is all of this liquidity being built up at the highs. And what has the market done? It has swept all of this liquidity. All of these buyers that had their stop losses on the line, they've been taken out of the market. What have we then done? We've very clearly given a market structure shift towards the upside. So once again, let's just identify it. We have a high, a low, a lower low, and a higher high. Other way around, I've done that in the wrong way. We have a low, a high, lower low, higher high. What can I see? This was the liquidity sweep. So this will be the low of the breaker, and this will be the high of the breaker, the market structure shift. So this is how I mark out my breaker. Simply from the swing low to the swing high, I drag this out. And as you guys can see, this breaker block is perfectly in line with this fair value gap. So I can take my entry directly off of the breaker. Instead of me having my stop loss all the way on this swing low, I can refine it down to the low of the breaker. And let's just say I wanted to target this high resting above here. So now if we play price on, you guys can see eventually we start chopping around. And as you guys can see, eventually, boom, we get sniped into the trade. What does the market also do? We've broken down this price action before. As you guys can see, all of this liquidity here gets swept. All of these early buyers that have entered the market, they've now been taken out of the trade. As you guys can see, eventually it's gonna hit. This is what I hate about high time frame trading. All right, in this case, you wouldn't have hit TP unless you refined your TP to, I don't know, this high over here. But nevertheless, you would have been break even on the trade. You would have done something to manage the trade. I don't trade the higher time frame, so I don't know how you would have played that one out. But the moral of the story is all of these relatively equal highs here, they got taken. So that probably would have been a more realistic TP. You guys can see we have a swing high here, we have a swing high here. This whole level here is like a level of resistance. These are relatively equal highs. And also, if we drop down to the lower time frame, our standard deviation target, which I taught you guys how to do in the other video, you guys can see the last manipulation move to the market shot shift was perfectly in line with that 2 to 2.5, which is where the market reverses. It doesn't always reverse. If you guys don't know how to use standard deviation, make sure you go and check out that video. But nevertheless, I'm going to go over one more example with you guys. Like I told you guys at the beginning of the video, you guys can use breaker blocks on the higher time frame. This can also be used as a PDA rate on the higher time frame. So as you guys can see, what have we done? We've swept all of this liquidity here. These relatively equal lows in the market have been taken out. Now we can also see as well that there are these relatively equal highs resting above, as well as this higher time frame imbalance in the market. So it's very obvious that cool, we've gotten this market structure shift, we've gone above this swing high here. We've also had a liquidity sweep. So this is showing to me that cool, it makes logical sense that we're going to go rebalance this fair value gap and take out these relatively equal highs. Also on the daily time frame, you guys can see this daily fair value gap was being respected. We were still inside of this daily fair value gap and it was holding. So this is clearly showing to me that bullish pressure is in the market. Now what do I need to do? Let's try to identify our higher time frame breaker block. Now I don't want you guys to get confused with a liquidity sweep from here to the market structure shift. This is wrong. Why? Because it has to be in the same leg. You guys can see this is a low. However, this low led to another high being placed. This is a low here, which led to the high of the market structure shift being placed. Does that make sense? So this was the low, this was the high, and we had a lower low, higher high. This is our breaker. Remember, small leg, big leg, not some next price action from last year. So what do you guys want to do? We want to mark out this small leg from the swing low to the swing high. This is our higher time frame breaker block. As you guys can see, price taps back into this higher time frame breaker block. So this itself can be used as an entry. However, we can also refine it. If we go down to the lower time frame, what can we see? We can see that we swept liquidity, and we've also given this market structure shift above the highs. So once again, what can I notice? I can see that we have this low, we have this high, lower low, higher high. This here is my breaker block. We will literally mark it out like this, and you guys can take an entry directly off of the breaker block. Put your stop loss on the low of the breaker instead of having a overly extended stop loss. Does that make sense? You guys get a more refined stop loss in the market. And let's just say we were to go and target these relatively equal highs in the market. If we play this trade on, I would not take this trade. Once again, it's too late. It's 9 o'clock. We don't trade outside of these time frames. However, what I'm trying to show you is the concept still applies. If we go back to the higher time frame, you guys can see, boom, eventually your TP does get hit. That lower time frame breaker block, which was inside of a higher time frame breaker block, all kind of connected and it played out. Does that make sense? That way, instead of you guys trying to take an entry off of this fair value gap down here and wondering why the price left you behind, you guys can look back and see, cool, there was a higher time frame breaker block and a lower time frame breaker block. These two breaker blocks led to the market expanding away. Does that make sense? But anyway, I guess that's been it for this video. I hope you guys have learned something new. If you guys are trying to take your trading seriously onto the next level, make sure you go check out the link in the description. That's where I go over more in detail my strategy and the way I personally trade. There's a lot more advanced concepts in there as well. Also, another thing I forgot to mention, like these breaker blocks, don't get married to them. Don't just marry the idea of a breaker block. If it's there, it's there. Don't chase it. You take what the market is giving you. You never try to take from the market. Does that make sense? But anyways, I appreciate all your guys' support. It's been your boy 1FX. Take care, my people.